Hi, good morning. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Now, if you're just tuning in, a very good morning and welcome to the final hour of my show. And just like I promised, that I'll be back here in a few more minutes to talk about anxiety and how to deal with anxiety, especially during these times. I am here to actually talk about it right now. So, we're talking about how to deal with anxiety because that is something that all of us have been experiencing during these past few, months and even past few year, or at least the past year. So make sure you stay tuned because I'll be talking about anxiety, how to overcome anxiety, and how to actually focus on other things so you can help yourself and help everyone else who's facing anxiety as well. But before we get into that, if you really like the content that we talk about, if you really like the things we share, make sure you text me on. Make sure to follow us actually on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and also make sure to send us a text or even share so that you could share your thought and your opinion by just texting us on 078 52 473 473. So you can actually keep yourself occupied but also keep yourself informed because that's very important, especially during these times. So let's get into how to deal with anxiety. But let's first talk about what exactly anxiety is. Now, to put it simply, anxiety is basically this feeling of unease, such as worry or fear, that could be sometimes mild or even severe, right? But the thing is, everyone has feelings of anxiety. We've all had feelings of anxiety at different points in our life, whether it was sitting for an exam, going for a job interview, or even something like a medical test, like when you were waiting for the results of a medical test that you did. So, anxiety at instances like that is completely common, a lot of people have worries, have a lot of unease when it comes to situations like that. But sometimes some other people actually find it very hard to control some of the worries they have because their feelings of anxiety are so much more constant and can often affect their daily lives. And this is constantly because you know they're constantly worried about that what they're going through. And they always tend to think that things might always end up wrong. Something might go wrong, and sometimes because of all those unknown things that are there, a lot of people out there actually have so much more worry, and they find it so much more harder to control their worries as well. And these feelings of anxiety are more constant, and it affects their daily lives. So that is what anxiety is, to put it simply. And anxiety is actually the main symptom of several conditions, including things like or rather including conditions like panic disorder. So if you have the panic disorder, if you know someone who has a panic disorder, you know that they're constantly worried. They're constantly trying to control things. They quite often try to take control of their lives. But obviously the thing is, no matter how much we try to take control of our lives, life is actually something that we can't control. It just takes its own path, it takes its own turn. And that's why it's very hard for people with anxiety to actually to not be worried about stuff. And that's why they try to control their lives a lot, because when you're uncertain about what's going to happen, you want to try and control it as much as possible, right? um so that's why these people are constantly in a state of anxiety. They're constantly worried, and they find it very hard to control their lives. So again, the phobias, different phobias such as agoraphobia or even claustrophobia actually is one of the main symptoms. Or anxiety is one of the main symptoms of different phobias as well. Now, when it comes to things like post-traumatic stress disorder or even social anxiety disorder, anxiety is the main symptom of these disorders as well. Now, PTSD is especially if is basically if you've been through a very traumatic situation, you're very you're constantly having these thoughts. You're getting scared, you're getting worried about things that have happened in your past, because it's very hard, especially if you're someone suffering with PTSD. If you're someone who has the post-traumatic stress disorder, it's very hard for them to sort of take control of their lives, because I mean, look, you've seen plenty of movies, you've even seen plenty of people who have PTSD suffer so much, right? So obviously, it makes a lot of sense as to why a lot of people, have anxiety, and why a lot of people are struggling to find control. And social anxiety disorder is basically when people have high levels of stress or high levels of fear when they have to interact with other people, when they have to be in close contact, or when they have to talk to other people. They find it very very anxious. They get very very anxious when they have to do that. So social anxiety disorder is also a disorder where anxiety is the main symptom. And now I know that there are different types of anxieties, but today we'll actually discuss a specific form of anxiety called generalized anxiety disorder, which is also called GAD for short. So, generalized anxiety disorder is actually a long-term condition that causes you to feel anxious about a wide range of issues and situations, rather than one specific event. So, if you're someone with generalized anxiety disorder, you'll constantly be worried about almost everything that happens in your life, everything that happens on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes it can be small things, sometimes it can be big things, but you'll constantly be worried about pretty much everything that happens. And it's not just one thing that you're worried about, it's about multiple things. Say if it's your job, like, what if I don't wake up on time to get to my job? What if I don't wake up on time to work from home? What if I get fired? What if I don't complete the work? So they can have different concerns, they can have different worries. They can have different worries about it can be even the most minute things. It doesn't always have to be something big. So that is how people with generalized anxiety disorder, that's how they behave. So um people with generalized anxiety disorder also feel anxious most days, and often struggle to remember the last time they felt relaxed. Okay, and this is something that is very common, that because they're constantly worrying and they're constantly concerned about what is or what might happen, they actually haven't felt relaxed at all. Because it makes a lot of sense, right? When your mind is constantly thinking of all the things that could go wrong, when your mind is constantly has, or rather, when your mind constantly has negative thoughts, then you can't really relax, right? Because sometimes even in your sleep, you're thinking of everything that could go wrong. And it's very very scary. It like when it's very scary when you feel like your whole life is out of control, when you're trying to take control and you can't, because you're constantly worrying about so many different things. And I think one of the worst parts is, like, some of these people with generalized anxiety disorder, a lot of people who suffer with anxiety, actually, when you first look at them, they tend to be people who you think are like very chill. They have their stuff sorted. They know what they have to do, but like actually inside they're panicking because they don't know if it will go wrong. They don't know if things will get messed up, and they don't know if they'll have to face consequences. So there are different things like that they're constantly thinking about. And because of that, because their brains are overworking all the time and thinking of everything that could possibly go wrong, they find it very hard to actually remember the last time they felt relaxed. And as soon as one anxious thought is resolved, as soon as they try to get over one, or they somehow manage to control anxiety over one thing, another one may appear. So another, they could be anxious about something else. And the thing is, when people have anxiety, when they're constantly struggling with trying to be okay, with trying not to panic, and trying not to overwork their brains, it can get very hard, especially if you are a person who's struggling with anxiety. If you're how bad things have been for people with anxiety during a pandemic, because when it comes to a pandemic, there is a lot of uncertainties, even for normal people. And what I mean when I say that is people who don't have generalized anxiety, or people who don't have any health conditions like depression or bipolar disorder, or what I'm talking about. So if there are people, all the people who don't have these issues as well, they themselves are going through a rough time trying to adjust to all the uncertainty that's there in the world. They themselves are going through a really rough time trying to come to terms with how much of things have changed, right? But and that is just normal people. So imagine if you are someone that has generalized anxiety disorder, if you're someone that is constantly thinking of everything that could possibly go wrong, well, then obviously, that the pandemic has taken a very, very huge toll on them as well, because these people are, they're constantly worried about everything that happens in their lives, sometimes something small, sometimes something big. But now with the pandemic, this is an added burden to them as well. This is an additional fear that they have. How could our future change? How could things change for all of us? And so because of that, they're constantly worried about so many things. So let's now get into talk about the symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder, because sometimes some people can actually have all these mental health issues and not really be aware of the fact that they have it. Okay, so sometimes when it comes to even other mental health issues like depression, bipolar disorder, multiple personality disorder, they are not aware of the fact that they have it, because in your head you wouldn't think you'd have such an issue, but sometimes you do. And it's very important that you know these symptoms so you can figure out if you have them or if someone has them, and so that way you can actually get help, right? So some of the symptoms that can actually cause generalized anxiety disorder are actually, there's a wide range of symptoms. Now, that can be both psychological and physical symptoms, and they also vary from person to person, but mostly it includes feeling restless or worried. And obviously, you'd feel restless or worried because you're constantly overthinking everything, you feel restless because you can't get any time to relax, because even when you're relaxing, you're thinking about everything else that could go wrong, like, oh, I couldn't do this, so now, am I going to get scolded? Am I going to get fired? Am I going to lose my job? So there are different things that they think of when even when they're trying to take a small rest, right? And they have trouble concentrating or sleeping. And again, like I said, it's because they're constantly focusing on all the things that could go wrong, right? That's just the way the brain works. That's just the way that they think. So when you're thinking of, like, what if something happens, when you're thinking what could happen, you tend to be restless, and you tend to or rather you tend to have trouble concentrating or sleeping, because you can't really focus on anything else that is there as well. So sometimes it can be things like, oh, I have to wake up at, say, 4 in the morning, but what if my alarm doesn't go off? And because it's things like that, and they're scared that alarm won't go off, they're constantly going to be awake the whole night, because they want to make sure that the alarm goes off, right? Now, another thing is dizziness or heart palpitations, something that dizziness or heart palpitations, because that is something that a lot of these people actually face. That they go through this a lot, and when they're dizzy or when they're having these heart palpitations, it's always important to check up on them, make sure they're okay, and they're not trying to they're not yeah they're not exerting any extra pressure on themselves. And I know that's easier said than done, especially when it comes to someone with anxiety. But you always need to make sure that if someone who's suffering with anxiety, if you are someone who's suffering with anxiety, that you always look out for yourself. Okay, now stay tuned, because I'll be back to talk about the other symptoms of anxiety, how you can deal with anxiety, and what to do. But I'll be back after this break. So make sure you stay tuned, because I'll be here to talk about it all.
Again, but now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, you've had one to forget, God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, has how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you how did I do? Well, you didn't do very well. And they get upset. And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young, well, still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. If I had a bad game, for example, he'd say to me, you had one to forget. That's it. You had
Your
one
dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter. Yeah.
he said to me, you had one to forget. Get over it. And that was it. So I dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, you've had one to forget, God, there'd be an inquest. An inquest. They'd have to me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much. A lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Hey, it's your girl Sarah right here on the Sunrise. A very, very good morning. If you're just tuning in, we were just talking about anxiety, especially because a lot of us are anxious. That is something that a lot of us are experiencing right now. So that is why we're actually talking about this topic. That's why we're having this conversation right now, because anxiety is something that all of us are going through. Anxiety is something we're all going through, but also especially in terms of people who actually have anxiety disorders, a lot of them are going through a lot of things. So that's why I thought we'll be talking about it right now. If you're just tuning in, you're with me, Sarah. You're right here on the Sunrise, and we're talking about anxiety, like I said before. And if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, if you have anything that you would like to share with us, you can make sure you text me on 078 You can get in touch with me, and you can share your opinions and your thoughts, and even some tips that you can offer that might help people with anxiety. Now, I would love to hear from you, so make sure you do that. But also, while you're at it, make sure you follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And make sure to download our app on your iOS and Android devices as well, because it's going to keep you informed, and there's nothing better than being informed, especially in these trying times. Okay, so let's get back to some of the symptoms that are there, especially when you have, and especially when you need to figure out whether you have anxiety or not. So one thing is actually being easily fatigued. You can be easily tired. You can be tired very easily because of anxiety. And another thing that you can actually feel is being being irritable, or something that you'll see in a lot of people with anxiety is the fact that that they might be irritated all the time. And that actually, if you actually think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because a lot of these people are constantly overthinking, which means that they barely get any rest. It means that their mind is always working, and it means that because their mind is always working, because they're trying so hard to take control of their lives, they're always tired and irritated because of the lack of rest, the lack of sleep that they have. And a very obvious common symptom of anxiety is you have trouble controlling your feelings of worry, which is something that a lot of people face because they can't necessarily control how many things they're worried about. They can't control the fact that sometimes their brains overthink and worry about every little thing. And you can also have muscle tension, which is a physical symptom of anxiety, where your muscles are always tensed because you're constantly in this you're thinking of everything that could go wrong, like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so stressed out, I'm so nervous, like, what if things go wrong, so your muscles could be tensed all the time as well because you're not relaxed. Now let's also talk about what exactly causes generalized anxiety disorder, right? Because we spoke about we spoke about everything, or rather, we spoke about the symptoms of anxiety. But now let's talk about what exactly causes generalized anxiety disorder. Now, the exact cause of the generalized anxiety disorder is not fully understood, but scientists believe, and evidence actually shows, that there is actually a combination of factors that play a role. And some of them may actually include overactivity in areas of the brain that is involved in emotions and behavior. Now, obviously, that is something that's very obvious to anyone. The fact that people with anxiety, or people who get anxiety, have a lot of overactivity in the areas of their brains that are involved when it comes to emotions and behavior. Now, that's why they're anxious, right? Because their brains are constantly overworking themselves. Their brains are constantly thinking of everything that could go wrong. So this is a cause of this is a cause of anxiety. So, imbalance of brain chemicals, and these are brain chemicals like serotonin and noradrenaline, which basically helps which helps in controlling and regulating your mood. When there's an imbalance of those chemicals as well, it might actually cause anxiety. Now, if you have parents, if you have family members who have had anxiety, if you have family members who are suffering from anxiety, or if you know someone who is very close to your family, be it a relative or even a friend, whatever it is, if you are genetically related to them, you can actually inherit anxiety as well. Now it's seen that it's 5 times more likely to you're 5 times more likely to develop the generalized anxiety disorder if you have a close relative with that condition. So if your parents or any of your close relatives actually have anxiety, well, then chances are that your close relatives actually will probably give it to you as well. So because there is a huge chance of you getting it, there is a huge chance of you getting it from from your family members. It's very, very important to make sure that you try to get yourself diagnosed, you try to get yourself checked, because if someone and someone you related to has anxiety, then you're 5 times more likely to get it. Now, if you've had a history of stressful or traumatic experiences such as domestic violence, child abuse, bullying, very extremely stressful and traumatic experiences like that, if you have a history of it, then chances are you'll probably get anxiety as well. And to sort of analyze how this happens, now, if you've been in a lot of relationships, if you've been in a lot of situations where you've been caught up in very traumatic experiences, um, especially if it's domestic violence, but obviously there are other forms of traumatic experiences as well. But for example, let's take domestic violence, right? So you're not sure when you're going to when you're going to face violence again. For example, if you're being continuously hit, like physically abused, if you're being physically abused, then obviously when someone is doing that to you, or when you're at home, whoever it is that abuses you, the thing that is constantly on your mind is, oh, when will this person come again and abuse me? When will this person come again and hit me? So when your mind is constantly worrying about, when it's going to happen again, or constantly worrying about the ways in which you can actually free yourself, or the ways in which you can escape from this sort of experience, your brain tends to overwork, or your brain tends to overthink and constantly worry, right? And it's normal that you would worry in a situation like this, because you are in fact in a very stressful or traumatic experience. And when you are caught up in an experience like that, no one obviously wants to be part of it forever, right? The main choice, or the main concern, is to try and get out of it as soon as possible. So obviously, if you're involved in a traumatic experience like that, then chances are you could also again you could have generalized anxiety disorder. Now, if you have a very painful long-term health condition such as arthritis, again, that is a risk factor, or that is a cause of anxiety. And if you have a history of drug or alcohol misuse, then again, that could develop into generalized anxiety disorder as well. It might even contribute to that. So if you have any of these things that I just said, if like things in your life have any relevance to what I just said, well, make sure to always take care of yourself, to get yourself checked, especially if you feel like your brain is constantly worried about things. Well, make sure to always get it checked, because it's very, very important that you get help, because anxiety is something that can It can be helped. It's not incurable. Obviously, there are really bad cases where you can't really do anything about it. But the thing is, the sooner you get help, the better it is for you. You know, the more you try to talk about it, the more you try to get help, the better it will be for you, because you'll feel less burdened. Okay. But now let's talk about how to control anxiety and what exactly we need to do. Now, when it comes to anxiety, there are different things that you can do. For example, things like psychological therapies, medicine, things like that that can be done. Okay, but obviously when it comes to psychological therapy, or even, getting therapy, sometimes not a lot of us can afford it, because therapy is, it's quite expensive. It's not the cheapest thing out there. And especially if you're the primary caregiver, or you're the breadwinner of a certain family, of your family actually, then you can't really spend that little amount you earn on trying to get help for yourself. I mean, it's not that you can't, it's just that if you were, if you had to choose between the two, you would probably choose your family first, right? As that's what a lot of us do. Because no matter how many like posts on Instagram, on Facebook we see about prioritizing yourself, about prioritizing your mental health, when you have other things like looking after your family, taking care of your family, you tend to put yourself second, because you tend to value them much more than you value yourself. So obviously things like psychological therapy, or even therapy, can be a bit expensive, is not accessible to everyone, and it is sometimes, privilege that some people have. And when it comes to medicine, again, you can't just get into the store. You can't just head into the store and decide, hey, look, I want this medication, I'm gonna buy it, give it to me. That's not how it works. You need prescription for some of the medications that are there, especially when it comes to disorders like anxiety, depression. You need a prescription that says that you need that you need this type of medicine, right? And because there is that kind of thing that is said, because you need a prescription rather, it's very very hard to actually find the time to go to the doctor, tell them about your disease, and try to get help, right? So obviously, because it's sometimes hard, we tend to find other ways to do it, right? But here are some ways you can actually help yourself. But also, it doesn't mean that you can't get therapy, or you can't get medicine, right? If you can afford it, if you're in a position to actually get it, well, get it, because that is going to be so very helpful as well. And it's definitely going to help you if you're someone who's constantly overthinking, if you're someone who's constantly tired, and you're trying to take control of your life. Okay, because the thing is, when you don't get help for some of these things we face, it actually ends up making life so much more miserable for us, right? Because no one wants to be constantly worried, no one wants to constantly think about what could go wrong. So make sure to always get help when you can. Make sure to get help if you can, and don't always, say no, or don't try to not get help because you don't want to, because you're putting everyone else first as well. If you're in the position to get help, then do that. Now, like I said earlier, if you also feel like you have some of these symptoms that I was talking about, if you've had some of the causes of anxiety in your life, way before you started realizing these things, well, make sure to talk to someone about it. Make sure to keep yourself safe, to get yourself checked, because it's not bad, it doesn't hurt for you to go get yourself checked. Because if you do have if there is something wrong with you, then you can always get help, and that help is so much better than you constantly making yourself miserable, making life hard for yourself. Because when you have anxiety, you're always thinking of what kind of way you're hurting other people, what kind of ways you're hurting yourself. There are so many different things. So if you have any of these symptoms, make sure you get help. And if you know any friends, if you have any friends who have these symptoms but aren't aware of the fact that they might be having anxiety, well, tell them that hey, maybe you might be having this. Maybe it's always good for you to go get yourself checked, right? So make sure you do that. But stay tuned, because I'll be back in a few more minutes to give you some tips on how to control anxiety. But right now we're going to head into a little break, but make sure you stay tuned.
One of the easiest ways to increase your net worth is to ensure that you have higher cash flows. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to not buy things on hire purchase, not buy things over months and months because you can't afford them now, but you want it. It's kind of that delayed gratification. Rather than buy that couch, that car, that stereo, that computer, whatever item, and pay it off over 12, 24, 36 months at an interest rate, rather invest that money, make do with what you've got, and then after 12, 24, 36 months, take the money that you've now invested and buy that good. An asset could be anything that appreciates or reduces a tax bill. So it could still be a liability, but it reduces their tax bill. And I'm not going to go into the technicalities because that's out of our remit here. However, for our use or our purpose, what we are talking for the listeners here is I would put this definition of an asset forward. An asset is anything that increases your income. Anything.
Now, there's a lot of conversation around who pays more taxes, if it is the rich or if it is the poor, right? When you are basically going out and during a day, if you go to a restaurant, you have to pay taxes there. If you buy a car, you have to pay taxes there. So why is it even a conversation that, the rich pay less taxes or the poor pay more taxes? Why is it a conversation like that?
Because it's true, the rich generally pay less tax. A rich person walks into a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's, they're not going to get a different bill than another person, right? They're still going to pay the same VAT on those goods. They're still going to pay the same thing. So that's all the same. However, the differences come in if you can pay yourself from your own company, you can structure it in a way that you pay less income tax through paying a bit of salary, paying dividends and so forth, and then also deferring income. Also, your pension payments or contributions can be different. So that increases your tax sort of gap, if that, if you want to use it that way. Where a PAYE person just gets paid salary and bonus. And now those are the most highly taxed sources of income in the UK, definitely, in the UK.
Welcome to Relaks Radio. You tuned into The Sunrise with your girl Sarah, and we're talking about anxiety. We're talking about ways in which we can deal with anxiety. So I'm super excited to be here, and welcome to the final few minutes of my show. Now, if you're just tuning in, we were talking about anxiety, and we were talking about different ways or the tips, or I was actually giving you tips regarding or tips on how to deal with anxiety, right? And if you like some of the content that we're talking about, make sure you follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, and social media. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And also make sure you download our app because that's going to always, help you stay informed. That's going to keep you informed. So make sure you do that as well. And something else, obviously, that you can do to make sure you're informed, that you're always the first to know about our content, is actually downloading our app on your iOS or your Apple device, or your iOS or your Android device. So make sure you do that because that will help you stay updated. Now let's actually look at some of the a few coping strategies or some tips on how to deal with anxiety. Now, the first thing actually is you need to take a time out. And I know it's easier said than done when your brain is constantly focusing about everything else that could go wrong. Always try to find a time where you can you can relax. And when you're relaxing, you can do something like practicing yoga or even listening to music. Things like meditating, getting a massage, or even learning a relaxation technique. Now, I've actually found listening to music very helpful because you tend to focus on the music instead of all the things that your brain is saying. So I would always listen to music, but I would also try to do other things like watch a movie, something that distracts you. Like, for example, if you have anxiety but you still love watching movies, you can sit through a movie and that will probably help you relax as well, because you're not constantly thinking of everything that could possibly go wrong. Another thing you can do is actually to eat well balanced meals. Do not skip meals, and do not and do have healthy energy boosting snacks on hand, because it's very important that you eat well balanced meals, because the more you eat junk food, the more you eat meals that are not healthy, chances are it's not really going to help you, because you're going to have a lot of other effects of that, because you're going to have so many other different types of sicknesses. So always make sure that you have healthy meals as much as possible, and you always have the required amount of meals, because when you skip meals, when you're so worried and you skip meals, then it's going to affect you later on in the future. And another thing is to actually limit your intake of alcohol and caffeine, because that can actually aggravate anxiety and trigger panic attacks. Now, obviously, because we're constantly in a rush and we're trying to stay awake, we tend to take caffeine, and we tend to sometimes to let go of all these worries we have. We tend to drink alcohol, but the thing is, when you do that, it aggravates your anxiety. It actually makes it much much worse, and it triggers panic attacks. And going through panic attacks, having panic attacks, experiencing them is actually very hard, because you start hyperventilating, you start freaking out, and panic attacks are very very scary. So obviously we don't want things to get as bad as that. So it's very important that you stay away from alcohol and caffeine. And like I said earlier, try to get as much sleep as possible, because like I said, sleep is very important. Sleep helps you it helps you get relaxed. It helps you keep your stress at bay, and it also gives you the additional sleep and rest that you need, because your body obviously needs energy to work on. And if you're not sleeping properly, if you're not getting that energy you need, then obviously your body is going to find it very hard to function. And another thing you can do is to exercise daily. And I mean, this doesn't and when I say exercise daily, it doesn't have to be huge, like intensive workouts. It doesn't have to be like 25 burpees and 40 crunches and I don't know, 35 squats. I don't know, but you know what I mean. It doesn't have to be intensive workouts. It can be something small. It can be like lifting a few weights, doing a few squats, doing some yoga, running a bit. It doesn't have to be intensive workouts as well. And something that has really helped me is taking deep breaths, especially when I'm really overthinking about something. I tend to just take a minute and take some deep breaths. And another thing that has helped me actually is trying to imagine every possible outcome. Because look, if you're someone with anxiety and your brain is thinking of all the different ways in which things could go wrong, then it would definitely help for you to imagine all the possible circumstances in which things could go wrong and how you would react to them if it does happen that way, right? Because if this happens, this is how I'm going to react. So this is how I will take control of it. So because of things like that, because of things like that which you can do, it will actually help to maintain your anxiety. Now, another thing to keep in mind is to always how do I put this? It's always to make sure that you keep doing your best. Don't ever give up on yourself. Don't ever give up. Don't think that just because things didn't work out the way you wanted it to, that you're a bad person or you've completely failed. Because as much as we all aim for perfection, perfection sometimes, aiming for perfection sometimes makes things very hard, because we all know you can't be perfect at anything. Like, it's impossible to be perfect. Like, that's why we're human. So always just remember that whatever you're doing, just to do your best in whatever you can, and don't ever let it get to you the fact that things didn't work out the way you wanted it to. And last but not least, something that you can actually do is to maintain a positive attitude and actually accept the fact that you can't control everything. Okay, you just need to come to terms with the fact that you can't control everything. Things might go wrong sometimes, and that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to sometimes, go through bad things. It's okay to fail in life, because eventually, end of the day, you never lose, right? Even if you fail, then you learn something out of it. And something I believe is that in life, you never lose. You either win or you learn. So that is how to deal with your anxiety. That is how to make sure you keep it at bay. And there's also a few tips on how you can help your friends, if they have anxiety, how you can help them out and what kind of things they should do. So that's what that was. But it's time for me to head out of here and make way for Jamie, who'll be here to keep you company on the chat drop with everything that you need to know. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned because she'll be here in a few minutes. But it's time for me to head out of here. So I'm gonna say goodbye, and I hope you have a very, 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 very good day and a happy day. So I'm gonna go out.